Be 1 second. Alright, guys. Hey, it's Miranda Randall. I am doing my What Is presentation on students with physical disabilities. So, an overview of what I'm going to be talking about today is what is a child with a physical disability? How has awareness changed in the last 75 years? Processes of diagnosis and tools? What does school placement look like? And curriculum in the classroom. So, what is a child with a physical disability? So, a child with a physical disability or a physically handicapped person means a person who has a physiosocial disability, infirmary malformation, disfigurement, or condition that eliminates or severely limits the person's ability to have access to the person's environment by normal functions. So this can mean that they need to use wheelchairs, or they maybe have prosthetic arms, or have crutches that they use to help them get around. So the process of diagnosis or identification for a child is typically before the age of 6. Many are diagnosed though between 12 and 23 months, so about 1 to 2 years old. The tools for assessment are typically performance-based, functional capacity, musculoskeletal assessment, self-reporting, physical function, plus pain visual assessments, and then speech and language assessments. So I wanted to break down a little bit of a timeline of what's happened since pre-1950 to modern day in terms of laws. So in pre-1950, many individuals lived in state institutions for persons with intellectual disabilities or mental illness. Many of these restrictive settings provided only minimal food, clothing, and shelter, and persons with disabilities were often merely accommodated rather than assessed, educated, and rehabilitated. But moving into the 1950s and 60s, the federal government, with strong support and advocacy of family associations, began to develop and validate practices for children with disabilities and their families. These practices laid the foundation for implementing effective programs and services of early intervention and special education in states and locally across the country. And then when we get to November 29th of 1975, the Education for All Handicapped Children's Act, or the EHA, was formed. This guaranteed a free appropriate public education, or FAPE, to each child with a disability in every state and locally across the country. So, yay, children are in school now. Then when we get to the 1980s and 90s, they try to achieve these national goals to access education for all children with disabilities. Several special issues and special populations require federal attention. Key amendments to the law in the 1980s and 90s were reflected in these national concerns. And then when we get to the 2004, IDEA reauthorized aligned with the idea that no Child Left Behind Act requirements. So in 2004, this was called for early intervention services for children not currently identified as needing special education, but who need additional academic and behavioral support to succeed in a general education environment, greater accountability and improved educational outcomes, and raised standards for instructors who teach special education classes. The most updated laws have been in 2017. So, how has awareness changed in the last 75 years? Typically, we have the laws that I went into. Some other ones that I'm going to mention is the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA, Telecommunications Act, the Fair Housing Act, Voting Accessibility, the National Voter Registration Act of 1993, also known as the Motor Voter Act, the Civil Rights Institutionalized Persons Act, or the CRIPA, and the Individual Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, that I talked about in that last slide. So, another way it's changed has been accessibility for people. So this could be elevators, stair lifts, aids, seating, automatic doors, technology, parking, adaptive programs, better socialization with peers, and transportation. So I'm going to have you guys take a pause here. I want you to stop and think for a minute. So, as most of us are considered able-bodied individuals, maybe not everybody in the class, but most of us are, I would assume, I want you to take a minute and contemplate how your life would be different if you had a physical disability. How would that change your day-to-day tasks or lifestyle? So you can take a moment now to pause the video and stop and think about that question. All right. So with the question that we had in mind, I'm going to show you about 2 minutes of this video. It talks about students at Stanford who talk about some of the disadvantages they have even going to school at a college level and that have physical disabilities.
I like first floor classes because I can't press the elevator button, so I end up being like really late for class because I have to like wait for someone else to use the elevator at the same time or something. It's just like little things that kind of just hold you up in the day and stuff. I was diagnosed with spinal muscular atrophy type 2. They say I have about the strength of a newborn baby. From kind of getting ready for the day, preparing food, that kind of thing. My disability is in my mind somewhere. I have to consider it wherever I go, whatever I do. My hands are really cold. I'm like, when they're cold, I can't move them. Right, for the daily in the opinion section, basically covers my experiences on campus and how some situations might be slightly different for me.
Anytime I go anywhere, people stare at me, which is like fine, and that's in every single space I've ever gone to at Stanford. Because it's just like, like, why do people think it's okay to stare? Do you want me to stare at you? Like, it's like, whoa, I have a disability. And then I just feel uncomfortable, and then I get really red, and then it's like awkward. I kind of title myself as the chick with sticks. So I was like, well, here we are. This is my life now. Might as well make like a thing out of it. I wanted to do medicine at a pretty young age. Then I had a skiing accident. I was paralyzed from the waist down. And I was like, wow, I've had way too much exposure to medicine at 16. I love Stanford. Like, I love it so much that I'm a tour guide. But sometimes when I'm speaking about it, I'm like, is this true?
You're part of an invisible community. You have to ask for shit because nobody in life is going to have anything.
All right, so I'm going to pause the video there. I just wanted to give those first 2 student views for you guys, but if you would like to continue the video, they have a lot of cool information and some more viewpoints to look at from other students with disabilities and how that affects their day-to-day lives and how they still really have to advocate to make sure that they get the things that they need to be a successful student and how that still is affecting them even, almost 50 plus years or 60 plus years now since some of the first laws are being passed for people who have physical disabilities.
Thing to you. I actually prefer being in a wheelchair, because
All right, this is another video. I'm not going to play it for you in this presentation, but if you would like to go back and look at it, it talks about how normalizing disability begins in schools and how it's a big responsibility on, educators and people in the school to normalize it and have children understand that it is a normal thing and it's not something to be afraid of or that is weird. So it's a great video, great TED Talk. Highly recommend watching it when you have the time. All right, so school placement. I know this is a really big quote. I'm going to read through it really as fast as I can so you guys don't get too bored. But this talks a little bit about school placement and how it's changed in the last 75 years. So, before EHA, many children were denied access to education and opportunities to learn. In 1970, U.S. schools educated only 1 in 5 children with disabilities. Many states had laws excluding certain students, including children who were deaf, blind, emotionally disturbed, or had an intellectual disability. Since the passage of EHA in 1975, significant progress has been made towards meeting major national goals for developing and implementing effective programs and services for early intervention, special education, and related services. The U.S. has progressed from excluding nearly 1.8 million children with disabilities from public schools prior to EHA implementation to providing more than 7.5 million children with disabilities with special education and related services designed to meet their individual needs in 2020 and 2021 school year. So as you can see in this quote, it used to exclude almost 1.8 million people and now includes almost 6 times that amount, which is insane when you think about it. So it's awesome to see that in schools that they are really trying to make sure it is a place that everybody can learn. And so in 2020 and 2021, more than 66% of children with disabilities were in general education classrooms for 80% or more of the time in their school day. So I wanted to give you guys a little bit of a personal story. So growing up, I actually had not one but two peers of mine who actually had physical disabilities. One of the students actually only had one leg, and the other students didn't have either of her legs. And so one of them used crutches for most of our adolescence, so between kindergarten through 8th grade. And then the other girl, she actually had 2 prosthetic legs growing up. And they were both my friends, and like I never saw them any differently than I did. And so I think the school did a great job growing up, not making those students ever feel excluded. They were able to give those students actually lifts for up the stairs, so that way those students could go to their classrooms that would be upstairs, and so that they wouldn't have to go up flights of stairs and have to go a lot slower or possibly miss their classes. So those students were able to get a lot of adaptations that fit their personal needs. And so I wanted to share that as a little bit of a background because that was in the early 2000s. So I'm sure now that it's 2023, even more progress has been made from when I was even a kid. So that's my little personal story with some people in my life that had physical disabilities and the way they got helped in schools. So, how is the curriculum in classrooms adapted or modified for students identified with disabilities? So, some of the things like we've talked about and with some other disabilities are things like adaptive seating, adaptive tests. This could be written or with a scribe, oral, notes being used, aides in the classroom helping them out, or even more than that. Aides with students in a classroom is a big one, whether they have a physical disability or not. Technology use. This could be for speaking purposes or in the communication purposes if they are not able to speak with their vocal cords. Timers for students, so they have like a time basis of when things need to get done. Graphic organizers, noise canceling headphones, and preferential seating towards the front of the classroom. So I have a couple questions for you guys for you to answer. Now that we're towards the end of the PowerPoint slides, I hope you guys enjoyed it. So my first question is, did you ever have a peer that had a physical disability? And how did or didn't that impact your perception of physically disabled people? So this could be hearing, language, physical, etc. It could be similar to my story. It could be somebody that maybe had a different type of disability. I would love to know what you guys had growing up. And then my second one is for us as teachers. So what would you as a teacher use as adaptations for your students with physical disabilities, and why? Why would you use those modifications compared to other modifications that one might use? So yeah. So these are my citations. I hope you guys enjoyed this presentation. I hope you got something away from it. And I'm really looking forward to seeing those answers and seeing your responses. So I will talk to you guys next week. Bye.